Hi, I'm Verushka, and welcome to Salt of the Earth interviews with people who I admire and who inspire me and who followed their hearts. Today, I welcome Rosy Aronson. She is a mentor of mine. She's an artist and a human design specialist. And I'm so excited. She wants to share with us today. She's just designed this amazing tarot card deck called the Wisdomkeepers. And I'm excited to hear what she's birthing into the world right now. Welcome, Rosy.
Thank you so much. So nice to be here, Verushka, and see what you're birthing into the world.
Yeah, I think I did a show when I was 14 at home with my girlfriends called the Verushka Show. And I would interview Cyndi Lauper, Madonna, and Kim Wilde. We'd all take turns being the different characters. So here I am. Those childhood dreams never die, I guess.
No, they don't. And
right?
They keep spiraling back, and it's kind of interesting when that happens.
Yeah. So tell me what you do, what you call yourself, and I know that you're very multifaceted or multi-passionate.
Thank you. Well, that's like one of the questions that always trips me up, because I really am not someone who likes to define myself by labels, because I keep breaking the patterns for myself. But in terms of what you're asking, what do? I have a private practice where I work as a blossoming guide or authenticity coach. I have created or developed a self-study course for women and service-oriented people called Design to Blossom, which is an online program where I teach human design and incorporate the expressive arts into the way that I do that, as well as kind of create a bridge between people who are interested in human design. And it's more transpersonal, heart-based incarnation, which I refer to as the Gene Keys, or which you might know about. And then I also am an artist and an author, and the first thing, or the most recent thing that I've created is this Wisdomkeepers Oracle deck that you talked about. And that's kind of like the big thing that I'm birthing right now that I'm super excited about. But mostly, I just want to say, mostly it doesn't really matter what I do. What I'm trying to do is help people know themselves and be themselves and trust themselves and express themselves, and know that it's okay to do that even when we're not perfect, even when we don't have it all figured out. I think that's maybe more important than the actual professional titles. So.
Yeah. Well, without telling your whole life story, what brought you to a place that you are probably living your life's passions and purpose, if you are so clear on the heart of the matter of what you do? What brought you to doing what you're doing, or why? What was the why that brought you to doing what you're
doing? Probably the pain of knowing what it's like not to be oneself, what it's like to be hiding, holding back one's self-expression, the fear of being judged or criticized or not seen as good enough or burned at the stake or whatever, whatever ancient fears and human fears we carry with us. I think I know the suffering of that. And so my whole life has kind of been dedicated towards finding out, well, if I take all those messages away or all those expectations that were put on me or by the culture, by my parents or my sister or whatever it is, if I take all that stuff away, who is Rosy? What does Rosy want to do? And so it's been a really long, hard, painful journey that required all kinds of self-explorations, and also a lot of fun, a lot of experimentation. I can't tell you how many things I've studied, from the most traditional to the most alternative, in the art field, in the psychology field, in the spiritual field. I'm a very curious person, and I've just been very courageously true to the impulse that I felt, even though most of the time it scared me.
Yeah.
And so it's funny, I was talking to one of my clients the other day, and he was kind of saying to me, oh, well, you look like you've kind of been on this path, oh, you got this education and then that one, and then you did this and that. And So like from the outside, my life might look comprehensive and kind of like I knew where I was going,
Yeah.
but it never feels that way from the inside because we're constantly like confronted with the next unknown if we are living on our personal edges. And I feel like that's what I've been doing, and that's what got me here. And most of the time I'm surprised by what I'm doing, like I am right now. So
Right.
I don't know if that answers your question.
No, completely. I
Well,
can really appreciate what you were saying. From the outside, it might look like this and that, or this easy, or this glamorous life, or this, and at the same time, no one's walked in your shoes. And I was thinking about, for myself, like the feeling of home and creating home, and why have I moved so much, and why can I not, why do things always change? Am I running from something? And I just realized, like, no, things come to an end when something isn't right. Then you're going to try something else. You're going to try something else. It wasn't that I failed any of those things or that things were taken away. It's more like it didn't feel right anymore, so I had to choose something else. It was a constant movement and choices.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it can look like a perfect poem from the outside, but it's like, no, it takes a lot of suffering and feeling through and what's correct for you. Yeah. So have you then always been an artist or been in the arts?
I would, again, I don't know if I'd call myself an artist, but I've always loved to make art. And ever since I was a kid, I love to draw and paint and dance and sing and all that. I love to express myself. I also felt extremely afraid of doing that. So I also did a lot of hiding, but this drive to express myself was always there, absolutely. And then there was the other piece, which was service, this desire to be of service, and whether that's through healing or therapy or whatever, just or having a nice chat with a friend, like that's always been the other really big kind of call in my life. And so in a way, my life has kind of been like art, service, and more trying to bring those two things together, which is why I got, I studied expressive arts therapy and drama therapy and tried to weave those things together. But it's also been interesting, like, to think about, and I'm just kind of spouting off here. I hope that's okay. But one thing that's been interesting, too, is kind of like at different times of my life, one of those things has been more at the base holding the other, and then they switch. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's been like, really what I do is serve people, and then I integrate the arts in order to do that. Mm-hmm. And other times, and I've been feeling more called to do this lately, and it feels like a stretch for me. It's like what I'm doing is I'm creating art and serving people through that. And I remember when I was younger, in a way my family's very creative. It's a creative bunch of people, but I think they're also very practical and traditional and didn't really believe that you can really make it as an artist. And in a way, they kind of looked at artists as to be like people that you kind of feel a little sorry for, and you got to support them. And so I remember once I was doing portraits at the time, and I did a portrait for one of my cousins whose dog had passed away, and I did a portrait of her dog, which meant a lot to this woman. And I remember my mom said, she said, "Oh, isn't she so nice to order that from you, to pay you to do that for her? Wasn't that like such an incredible favor that she's doing for you?" And I think at some level, I got that message, like art can't be a gift in its own right. Mm. That one's self-expression can't really be a gift. And I think that's something that I'm working on. Like if something just comes through me, and it's not just me reflecting someone else, which I do so much in my counseling work, but it's really something just coming from the inside because it has to come out, that could actually be a way of touching people and transforming people and serving people. And so I don't know, I just keep kind of working with this relationship between art and service and playing around with the different relationships. So. And
it doesn't seem to be getting old, no matter how much you've studied, right?
Well, no, I mean, it's creativity, right? How can creativity get old? That's what we all are. We're all constantly creating and recreating ourselves each moment.
Yeah. Well, you're such a wonderful model for me for that, and you definitely came into my life at pivotal point where I had found human design as a huge sigh of relief. I mean, I studied astrology for years, and I mean, you can find out your character, you know, based on childhood or, you know, all the different tests that you can see yourself through different lenses. But human design totally brought a whole new, I don't know, template, understanding. Tell me about how you found it and what it did for you and why you became passionate or think it's important for people to know about it.
It was many years ago. I was visiting a good friend of mine, Val Tate, in San Francisco, and I just, you know, I was sitting on her couch, and then I saw this little printout of this human design chart, and I was like, what? What's that? Like that, I was very intrigued by it. I also felt that it was a little mechanical and weird, you know, like the way it looked. I kind of like color and movement and like juicy stuff. So it was kind of, there was something about it that felt weird, but I was so drawn to it. And I was reading about it and reading about the intersection between one's true nature and the places where we're open and receptive to our environment. It felt like, wow, this is a map of the nature-nurture dilemma. And I thought, God, you know, maybe for my birthday, I'll give myself a gift. And so I got a reading from Carol Zimmerman. And it was so wonderful to be surprised by my design. Like I love the surprise of it, because one of the first things I learned was that I'm splenic in terms of the way that I make my decisions, that it's not even about going out and making things happen because of my mind or kind of going out into the world and initiating a bunch of things, but as a quote unquote generator, I was here to wait for life to come to me and then trust my instincts in the moment. And I learned about an open center, like human design has these chakras. You know, we have 9 chakras or open centers. I mean, some of them are open, some of them are defined or a part of our nature. I don't know how much I want to get into the whole like definition of it. But anyway, I learned just how sensitive I was to the emotional environment around me. Mm-hmm. And that so many of the things that I really thought were my own feelings were actually colored by the feelings of the people around me, which blew my mind. Especially as someone who'd done years of therapy, both on the couch and off, like being the one actually as the therapist, like to see that, wow, how much of what we think is our actual internal reality is ours, and how much of it is actually being absorbed through our environment. Like it was just an amazing way of thinking about things. And so then I got a reading from my husband and my daughter, and then it was just, there was no stopping me. Like I gobbled it all up, and I took the analyst training, and I just found it to be so incredibly practical and helpful to people. So helpful in an extremely practical way, in liberating people from their conditioning, helping them to trust who they are, to know, you know, who they are, and know where we get caught, you know where it is that we lose ourselves when we're making our decisions in life. Mm. And now, you know, I mean, it of course, after I really started to understand the system, I couldn't help but apply my creative spirit to it. And it evolved the way that I hold it. I don't hold it in the way that some of my teachers did in the past. I brought in the arts. I brought in more transpersonal psychology. My background is in psychology. So for me, you know, if it gets too rule-based, or if there isn't some way to work with the emotional stuff that does come up when we're really trying to live according to our true nature, then for me it's not as rich as it could be. So I've done my best to add a flavor of rosiness to the way that I work with human design. And then, of course, one of my favorite human design teachers or writers was Richard Rudd, who is the man who authored the Gene Keys, which is kind of another incarnation of the I Ching, which is also connected to human design. And so then my experience or way of kind of working with human design started to incorporate some of the really important concepts that he brought in, such as, and again, I don't want to get too detailed, but something called the spectrum of consciousness. And I bring this up. This is not only his term. I know that Ken Wilber uses this term, but the way that Richard uses it, I think, is really important, and it's also a really big part of the of the way that the Wisdomkeepers Oracle deck turned out. So that's why I'm kind of bringing it up, where
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at not just your design, but your life from this spectrum where we have a gift, and then we also have a shadow, and then we also have like this place where when we're really tapped into kind of the universal oneness, we express ourselves or experience not even our small selves, but like the big one through that thing that he calls the city. And so I incorporated that also into the way that I look at human design, that you could have the same chart as someone else, but what frequency you live that chart through can be completely different. So, you know, are you really coming from a place of open-heartedness, or are you coming from a place of fear and contraction? And we all have all of that. You know, we've got fear, we've got open-hearted, we have our moments of, you know, universal bliss, cosmic bliss. But for me, that's been a really helpful model to integrate into my way of holding human design and working with people. So that was a mouthful.
That's wonderful. I mean, it's so multi-layered, as you say. Who do you think human design is for? I mean, who does it speak to? I mean, if you didn't have a background and knew anything about astrology or didn't subscribe to it, but you're open to therapy, you're not necessarily schooled in any new age wisdom, who would it really appeal to? Or do you find that people maybe who are searching for answers are the ones that just attract it naturally?
That is a really good question. That is such a good question. And then there are different layers of appealing, right? There are going to be a lot of people who it appeals to, but only on a surface level, where it doesn't really call them to do it, you know, because it's not just a system to kind of, like a typing system. It's really a lifestyle. For me, it's a spiritual practice that happens through decision making.
Yeah.
And so people can be drawn to it at different levels. So I just want to say that. So like I think a lot of people who are interested in self-help or interested in astrology or the Enneagram or typing systems might find it really interesting. Anybody who's interested in the nature-nurture inquiry would find it interesting. But the people who are drawn to it enough to actually put it into practice and take it seriously in that way, I don't know why some people respond and some don't. And it's funny. I mean, I'll tell you that there are some, I don't talk about it very much to people. Like when I tell them about what I do, I mean, usually I wait until they really show like a genuine interest, until I can feel that they're really responding. I've had people say, "Oh, I'd like a reading." And I just get this feeling like, no, they're not that interested, you know? And then it's not, then there's so many other things they could do that would be so much more meaningful and wonderful for them. And I think that's kind of what human design has done for me. It's like, I also trust people in their genuine responses. Like, I'm much more interested in supporting people in the direction that they're genuinely lit up around. Mm-hmm. You know, than I am like pushing this thing that's super cool, but really only for the people who really find it super cool. So right. I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah, I mean, and around, definitely. I feel like it is almost like an intuitive thing. I mean, someone might come to you for therapy and you may never bring up human design, is what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely. A lot of the people I work with have no idea.
Uh-huh.
Who was the one who kind of released it into the world. I think there were plenty of people in Ibiza that knew him. He was great friends with them. I don't think they knew much about human design.
Wow. What year did you discover it?
Oh, God. So let me think. What am I now? I'm like 48. And it's 2015. So maybe like 2003?
Wow.
Does that make sense?
I mean, you must be Bay Area based forever and ever, because you seem to have been exposed to a lot of progressive things. Only in the Bay Area, right?
I know, this is a crazy place. But no, I just moved here in 99.
Oh, yeah?
I lived I grew up in the Midwest in Chicago, like the northern suburbs of Chicago. And then I lived in Denmark for about 8 years. And then I moved back to Chicago or Evanston for a couple of years. Then I came here and I went to the California Institute of Integral Studies. That's where I got my master's in expressive arts therapy. So that's kind of when but even when I studied in Ann Arbor in undergrad, I learned about the school, like CIIS, and I took transpersonal psych. So I've been immersed in this for a while.
Yeah. And then you probably just found the right things once you were in the Bay Area. I mean, that's just such a wonderful, well-rounded background too. Living in Europe gives you a lot of perspective. So when I met you and through your wonderful Design to Blossom course, and I love the art, just even being exposed to doing the art and figuring out your, getting to know your design seemed like almost an osmosis was happening that it wasn't even logical. Mm-hmm. And you really inspired me in many ways. So besides holding space for people and counseling them, how did the Wisdomkeepers now come about? Did you set out to start a project? I mean, do you just do a lot of art in your free time, or tell me about the journey to the Wisdomkeepers and where it's at now?
Thank you. I just want to say, though, to anyone watching this, that Verushka is quite the creative goddess herself. Seriously, the creations you made, the expressions you did in the course that I got to witness, and then your jewelry and what you're doing now. And so, you really are a deeply creative, alive being, and I'm very inspired by you too. So I just wanted to say that. So, actually, when I started this project, it was not a project. I was having a time in my life where I felt so far away from my art. My life had been, completely, being a mom and taking care of my private practice. And I was just desperate to have some time, like some introversion time, because I'm such an introvert. Like just some time to myself, some self-care. And I remember like my husband and my daughter, they're like, just doodle. Don't make a big, because I used to make big paintings and it took so much space and it was so messy and I can't do it in my house because I see clients in my house. And so I went to the art store and I got like a pad of paper and a black pen and I just started doodling. And then I had fun. And then I thought, oh, well, what happened if I made a face, like the outline of a face, and I doodled inside of it? And then all of a sudden, like this incredible being came out. Like she was like, I'm like, whoa. I felt like she was loving me or healing me or telling me everything was going to be okay, like calming my nervous system. And then I thought, God, what if I do another one? Who would I want to do? And then I kind of like would get this intuitive sense, like, oh, I need an African woman. Like I need an African woman to look at me, connect me to my roots. And so then one of those came through. And then, slowly but surely, I just kept doing it because I felt like it and I couldn't wait to see who would come. And most of the time it was just some intuitive hit. And I felt like they all were bringing me this, they weren't worried about me. Like they would look at me and they'd be like, Rosy, it's all going to be okay. And they were from all walks of life. Like it felt very important too, because at the time I was feeling particularly despairing about what was happening in our world, and all the divisions that we humans create between us. And I was thinking about how really you can be loving, wise, and compassionate no matter where you come from, no matter how old you are, no matter what race or ethnicity or culture or whatever. And I found myself like healing that wound inside of me by calling in these people from every imaginable, diverse, indigenous, new archetype, old archetype, backward. Like I just was calling them in, and they all embodied love and presence and aliveness, and they weren't in judgment, they were in acceptance. And I think it was just, I did it for me, honestly. And then, after I'd been doing it for a while, I started feeling like, well, with all my love of the Gene Keys and human design and the I Ching, why not just call in 64? I'm just going to keep going until I got 64 and holding the intention of really kind of representing the diversity of our planet. And of course, you can't capture everybody. Now I'm thinking, oh my God, there are like 80,000 more I could make. But anyway, so then I kind of set myself like, okay, we'll do the 64. And then as they started coming, I started kind of like feeling their stories. Like, wow, they actually became these wise people because they had a life. And their life wasn't easy. Like, I got that feeling like none of them got to be where they are today easy. Like, they got there because they suffered. They got there because they had pain that they had to work through, that they had fear they had to overcome. And so as these stories started to pull in and the faces were coming in and they felt so archetypal to me, and not just like old archetypes, like I'm saying some new archetypes too, like the guy who reminds me of like a hybrid of Edward Snowden and Steve Jobs and Ira Glass from This American Life. Like he's a new archetype, right? Like, you're not going to find him in an old, tarot deck or whatever.
Yeah.
So as the stories started to come in, I started thinking about them in an archetypal sense. I thought, God, how could I incorporate the wisdom of the Gene Keys, which is it's a really big inspiration of mine, into their stories. And so I would write the stories and then I'd find like, okay, so how could I bring a Gene Key in here? And so inside of the stories, you'll see I'm weaving in the shadow, both its reactive and its repressive form. I'm weaving in the gift. I'm weaving in the city. And then also inside the faces, I don't think I said this, but I infused them with all of these symbols, like these universal symbols that I felt capture the essence of the person. So if the person was like someone who was particularly loving, I'd put a lot of love symbols. And if it was someone who was like had integrity, then maybe I would put symbols that had to do with clarity and focus and honesty and, that kind of a thing. So it became like this dance, this weave, kind of like channeling and then incorporating. And so that's what happened. And so then as that was happening, I thought, God, maybe I should make an oracle deck out of this. So it's not just the 64 faces of awakening, which is what I like to call them now, but like I can take this 64 faces of awakening and create something really practical for people that they can use, not as a traditional tarot deck, but as an oracle deck. And not to predict the future, but to get to know themselves and to get permission to be themselves and to be invited to explore, both their shadows and their gifts. And often our gifts are our shadows. Our gifts are the things that had been stuffed under, that were not safe to express. So they end up expressing themselves in a distorted way or staying underground. And so how am I doing? I'm kind of telling the story of.
Yeah. So yeah, when you wanted to turn it into an oracle deck, then what kind of time frame? I mean, writing that's a lot of people that you were conversing with.
Whoa. I feel like I've been in a whirlwind. And you can ask my daughter.
Did that just take over your life? I mean, or is it still? Absolutely. Did you have to put a lot of other things on hold, or where are you at with it right now?
Yeah, I mean, I've still been seeing my clients. I've been not as active in my Design to Blossom program, and I'm really looking forward to getting back into that. But yeah, I have been completely immersed. Like, it took me over a year just to draw them. And then to really like channel the stories and then to incorporate the Gene Keys. I've been working on that all summer. And so now like they're at the, I can show you that I have an example. I have a sample here to show you, but they're on their way. They're on the boat on their way over here, and hopefully they'll be here within the next couple of weeks so I can start sending them out to the people who have bravely pre-ordered decks like you. And then another thing I've done, oh my God, this came as a surprise to me, but I was really encouraged to do this by this incredible woman, Ann Cameron, who I have been working with, who's been supporting me in kind of the marketing part and also in creating a paperback version of the little book that comes with the deck. And so that's another thing that's coming out now too. And it's just, I can't tell you, this has been intense. I feel like this is a birth, maybe like triplets, because every time I think I've given birth to something and I can rest, the new contraction starts. But I'm really excited about it. I'm excited about it.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a great topic that you're bringing up right now. And then coincidentally, you just posted this blog post today about, the fear around birthing these type of things. I mean, I've had quite a few people say yes to me to do these interviews, and then going to sleep dreading, thinking, oh, I'm going to disappoint them. They don't know what they signed up for. I can't believe these people that I hold in such high esteem are saying yes and thinking, oh, they're going to pull the plug. I'm not going to. So, and then telling you even, oh, I'm kind of scared to do this. And then tell me about how that fits into where you're at right now with this project.
It fits in everywhere. I've never had to overcome so many fears, really. Like, it's just one fear after the other. And I think what's helping me is I feel like this is really not about me. Like, that's what I keep having to remind myself. This is not about me. Like, I think sometimes it's about me, like my capacity to articulate on behalf of these wise beings who are far wiser than I am. Like, I still consult them every day. I'm like, okay, what do I do now? Because I'm just like this little human being, and I make mistakes all the time, and I'm terrified of public speaking. You ask anyone that knows me, they know, oh, Rosy prefers to be in her pajamas. Like, I'm just like, I don't like getting dressed up. I don't like being a public person. I'm terrified of people having all kinds of projections about me and thinking I'm better than I am, or, just hurling, understandable accusations at me. I was terrified that Richard Rudd wouldn't like it, that he wouldn't approve of it. I could just go on and on.
Did you have to ask for permission or saying, hey, I'm doing this? Like, that's kind of a fine line too, when you're inspired by something, but then you're getting into someone else's territory,
Exactly.
You need to get permission.
Exactly. I did. Even in the beginning, when I was getting close to being done with the faces, I said, I wrote to him and I said, I'm considering creating an oracle deck, and I'd like to be able to integrate the gene keys, and how do you feel about that? And he said, great. He's been very supportive the whole way through, I have to say, which has been hugely wonderful. But also, that didn't mean that when I finally wrote the book, right? Like, it's hard for, like, how can you complain about pictures of nice faces, right? Like, that's, but when I wrote the book, there was a new thing to be terrified of. Like, oh my God, did I represent the gene key? Because the thing is that they're really first and foremost these beings that came to me with their stories. That's, and so I had to be true to that. And then I wove the gene keys in, so I didn't know if he was gonna feel okay about it or not. And then I had to send him, the file of the written work, and I was scared all over again. I had to. So,
and then were you waiting for his comments or feedback or permission?
Yes, I had to wait. He was very quick to get back to me, which was great. But yeah, I mean, in every step of the way is a new, like, chance to breathe and trust that, if our heart is in the right place, even if we mess up, even if we make mistakes, I think people can feel it. Like, they can feel the goodwill that's driving what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so anyway, yeah. So yeah. And I know he's had the same thing, right? Because the gene keys is very different than human design, and yet it's an incarnation, or it's connected to human design. And so he's had to work through the whole, and the human design, it's connected to the I Ching, right? So what can Ra-Uru own as his own? What can, it's when we're dealing with these things that are archetypal or are kind of, universal.
Yeah.
It's this whole question of ownership is really a tricky thing. And I'm still trying to figure it out and trying to walk that line with integrity in terms of the product that I create. And so the other thing is I am donating a portion of all of that I earn to the Gene Keys Foundation. And that's another way that I'm acknowledging that aspect of the root.
Beautiful. So do you think that there's going to become a momentum where you think you're going to have like the relief of the birth? Is it when they're in your home or in stores, or when you get the feedback, or when do you feel like you might have the sense of being arrived on the other side?
I think I am now no longer under the illusion that will happen forever. You know what I mean? Like, I have arrived and now I can relax. Like, even that you asked me to do this, right? It's a new thing to kind of feel nervous about, right? For me, not just for you, but for me. Like, am I going to be able to do justice to these wisdom keepers? Or so I think that, you know, now like my house is turning into like a shipping and handling factory. It's going to be a huge thing to try and, you know, send all these things and get them where they need to go safely. I have some other kind of ideas lined up when I'm done with this big push that I'll share about maybe another time. I feel like it's going to, but I will say though, that one place where I have felt relief, like for example, one store bought 30 decks in Hong Kong. And they received them first because they were closer to the printers. I haven't even received my decks yet, but they received theirs. And it was a huge relief when they received them, and they received the essence of them. Like, I felt like they were using them and loving them and connecting with the wisdom keepers. And I felt like the wisdom keepers were having their own life and it was working. Like, they were creating their own relationships out in the world. And that's a huge relief, because when you're creating something and nobody's seen it and nobody's interacted with it, you have no idea. Is this going to resonate with anyone, or just me? Is this just my little,
Absolutely. I
so
think
that's a huge relief. Yeah.
That's super valuable what you're sharing. And on that note, do you have advice for budding artists or people who are doing what they're called to be doing, even though the world is not reflecting anything back? How do you, now that you're so fresh in it, what recommendations do you give to people to just walk that razor's edge?
It is such a razor's edge. I feel like I've been in that position my whole life. My whole life. So many things I've put out there. No likes. Nobody's reading it. Nobody's seeing it. Nobody, first of all, I would say know that you're not alone. You're so not alone. Gather your people to you, like the people who know you and love you and respect you, and let them know if you're feeling ashamed or terrified and you're thinking of just scrapping the whole thing and just, moving to Bali or something. Let your loved ones support you and tell you it's okay. Remember that this is something my husband always said to me. He's like, when you're in the creative process, you're either in the circle of creativity, or you're out of it. And when you're in it, you're actually doing it. You're immersed in it. And when you're truly immersed in a creative process, you love what you're creating. It's like you're totally in love with it, and you're not even thinking about anyone else when you're actually creating. It's when you're outside of it that you start wondering, well, what do people think about it? Am I doing it good enough? Is it big enough? Who is it going to impact? Who won't it impact? It's because we're separate from the creative process. So the most important thing is to stay in. Like when I wrote this book, a children's book, or 8 to 12-year-olds, called The Tale of Serendipity, and it wasn't until I was done with it that I started like doubting myself and starting to look at it like, oh, this is stupid. Who wrote this? Who's ever going to read this? But when I was writing it, I loved the characters. I was so attached to them. I wanted to know what would happen to them. I could care less about what anybody thought. And so there's something about just get back in that circle, get into the creativity. When you're there, it doesn't matter. And then when you start coming out and thinking about sharing it with other people, gather your supporters, breathe a lot, cry a lot, let your body shake, and be resilient. Keep bouncing back, because if you're really called to create something, you don't really have a choice about it anyway. You really don't. Mm-hmm. And surrender to that. Like, just in the end, it's not even about you anyway. When something's trying to come through you, and then you just be gracious. Just be gracious. Say, all right, guest house, come on in. And get help. Go to counselor. Go to a creativity coach, or get support so that you don't abandon yourself. So you don't abandon this beautiful being that's wanting to come through you, because I feel like the angels are knocking on our doors these days. Like, they're wanting, I'm going to cry now, but like, we're really here to, we can't let ourselves get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, just, it's okay to be scared, but just do it anyway and get all the support that you need so that you can, because I think the world needs everybody to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, everything you shared is just so incredibly profound. And literally, I just read Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic and Brene Brown's Rising Strong back to back, and they shared absolutely everything you shared with different words, and people really need to hear this message right now. And what I've been getting a lot, I mean, with all the synchronicity revolving around the people I'm interviewing, and the Wisdomkeepers and Indigenous culture, and that this whole movement of being in creativity and being in your aliveness or connected to your genius. Coincidentally, I got in touch with the director of the Wisdomkeepers, the movie that's totally separate, about the Peruvian shaman in the Andes who've been underground or away from society all these years and now are coming out. And it's such a beautiful movie because they just show them how they're interacting with the mountains and nature. And basically my whole last 10 years have been just following nature and having nature be this alive being and drawing these things out of me and communicating. And when you realize you are never alone. Like, who are you in those alone times? Who are you interacting with? What are you seeing? What are you experiencing? And it really, I just love what you're saying. I feel like the angels, they want us to try new things. They want us to step out and break out of all the old programming and conditioning, all the things that our ancestors couldn't do, but that now we do have this free choice to try it out and leave those voices behind that have limited us. And I love what you said about just like, we're not alone and we're so supported. Even if we look like physically we're alone, everything is alive. And it's like, you just have to ask that question or ask for help. Even if you're just asking the sky or the tree, or your gods, just ask the question instead of going into the smallness. So that really resonated, everything you just shared. And on that note, I'd love to hear about how Indigenous culture, or how these characters that came to life for you, how that plays a role in your work.
Well, first, I feel like in a way you're kind of speaking to that, and I'm so glad that you brought in that we are not alone, not just amongst other humans, but on this beautiful planet, where we're surrounded by life everywhere, and there's consciousness in everything, and we are connected to everything. And these are some of the basic indigenous truths that we have in our modern culture lost touch with. This is a part of like the wound that many of us moderners carry, is we feel so separate. We feel separate from our bodies. We feel separate from our environment. We feel separate from each other. And I think that there's been a role to play as we become much more strategic in our mind and evolved as a species that's been positive in terms of this separation. But I think it's time now that we go back and we welcome the wisdom of our ancestors, the ones who have understood interconnectedness at a very, very deep level. It's kind of like, you hear like thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Yeah. And I kind of feel like this is the time of synthesis. And in a way, the indigenous kind of, that's the thesis. And then in a way, like modern culture has taken us into the antithesis, but really now we're trying to bring it together, because there are some really beautiful, wonderful things that have happened as we've created industrial society. There's a lot of beauty that can happen through an individuation or differentiation process, that when which is what happened when we leave the tribe to become individuals. Because if you look at kind of ancient tribal cultures, there can be a lot of oppression within that system as well. So it's kind of like, I don't know, is this making sense to you, what I'm saying? So something about a returning to the ancient roots. I'm seeing this everywhere. So many people are going back. They're going to Peru. They're working with the medicine. They're integrating all of the shamanistic traditions into psychotherapy, into, all of these more modern ways of healing. And mindfulness, bringing in the ancient from Asia and Tibet and Zen, and kind of incorporating that into trauma work, EMDR. It's kind of like it's all starting to come together. And I think that's really, really beautiful and necessary, and a big part of maybe why the ones that came to me, these wisdom keepers, a lot of them were representing ancient indigenous cultures.
Yeah. So what do you hope people will gain from being exposed to your deck and handling them and seeing the faces?
I hope they feel kind of what I feel, like they're loved, inspired, like there's someone out there, a lot of people, a lot of wisdom keepers out there who aren't worried about them, who recognize them for who they truly are, what their true gifts are, who will love them even as they face their shadows, even as they face those dark parts of them that they've kind of pushed away or rejected or felt rejected in relationship to. I would love people to use the cards really like friends, like, and also it's very practical, right? So it's not they're the cards, but they're also layout. They're like spreads that people can use to explore their relationships, to explore their genealogy, their dreams, their challenges, their integrity. All kinds of their human design, if they want to, and then also the gene keys and the different activation sequences. Like, there are a lot of ways to work with the wisdom keepers in a very practical way. But really, I just want people to feel loved, and accepted for who they are, and encouraged to. I mean, that's the thing. It's not even like I want people to go out and kind of leave their fears behind and just like bloom. But like, no, go and bloom while you're friends with your fear. Grab your fear by the hand and go out together. Because, we're human. We're going to have fears. We're going to be scared. We're going to have moments where we're terrified, or where we're constricted, or we're angry, or we're jealous, or we're envious, or whatever. This is natural. That's okay. That's what I want people to get. Don't be scared to look in the darkness, because there's so much light to be found there. Love yourself as is. Go forth as is. Bloom as is, in spite of yourself. That's what I do all the time. And that's what I want. I think that's it.
That is so moving and touching. I mean, I feel like it's going to be a gift greater than you even know. I mean, I can feel the magic of it already, especially someone like myself who's really about, how do we get rid of oppression? How can we see that the color of our skin doesn't matter? I'm always the underdog too, because I look extremely privileged, so I don't fit in. We all are suffering from this great separation, and to have those cards really be reflecting back that oneness, like that gaze through the eyes. And I can't wait to see the symbols that you talk about, because I think symbols are really, really powerful. And what a gift. You're such an amazing muse for me. Can you show us some of the cards you pulled for me?
Yeah, I can. What was the thing? You just said something I wanted to say something about. I can't remember.
Interconnectedness, separation, isolation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I wanted to say that that's something that I really like that you said that too, because in a way, this is all about oneness, but it's also about diversity. Like, you'll notice that all of the stories are so different, but they're all human. And like, even this thing that you talk about, like, there's even a wisdom keeper. Interestingly, one of your prime gift wisdom keepers, the wisdom keeper of revolution,
Amazing.
who is a, she's born a white woman in
Wow.
privilege, and she has a deep, open, receptive heart and a deep sensitivity to the oppression of people all over the world. And she becomes quite an activist in her story, and also has to kind of confront her own judgment of people who judge others. And she kind of, and I think you'll find her story really interesting. She's an important one for you.
I can't wait.
Yeah. And then another one for you. He's the one who I said, like, most of them came from my imagination, but every once in a while, I would either be like inspired by a person who I feel embodies an archetype, or like I'd create a hybrid. And this is a hybrid card. This is the one who reminds me of Snowden, Steve Jobs, and Ira Glass. He's a visionary and a creative in this new culture, like through technology. Like, there's something about him, and he actually has, in his story, he has to let go of technology for a while and really go back to nature to find his right use of it. So anyway, he's one of yours. And then this is one of yours, Simplicity.
Oh, beautiful.
She's one of the very first ones that came through. I feel like she was the reason why I did this, because I was longing for simplicity. And then one of yours too is the Wisdom Keeper of Forgiveness, who is on the cover. See, she's on the cover of the box.
I'm crying now. So beautiful.
And then there's one more card that I didn't tell people about, but I will tell them right here on your show. That is called the Mirror card.
Did you pull that for me?
Yes, I did. So you can see your beautiful self, because you are your own wisdom keeper, Marushka.
Okay, I need to get the hankies now. Wow, that is so amazing.
Yeah.
That's kind of what is the traditional tarot one have the black card? What is that card? That's sort of the black card or the blank card or the card. I can't even think of what it's called right now. But the mirror, it's so interesting because when I was very isolated here for a while I was doing your program, and I talked about just being in the jungle, pulling weeds, not having community, and I would walk through Hilo very, very feeling sorry for myself, and didn't have a job, was looking for work, and I would find these beautiful prints in this art gallery, and I started charging them on my credit card because the art lit me up. These beautiful, innocent, young Hawaiian hula dancers, so precious, so precious. And then I found out the artist lives here. And that's the only thing I would buy myself to feel happy, were these beautiful prints of these hula girls. And then I found out in this one boutique that they were selling his cards, and he had this whole series of hula girls with a mirror in the middle. Yeah. And I'm like, this man is brilliant. And since February, I'd like to report I get to paint next to him every Friday. So my life is truly miraculous. For 6 months, it's changed my life.
It's beautiful, beautiful. See,
so it's no coincidence you pulled the mirror. So is there anything else you'd like to say about those cards? That was just such a treat to get a little preview.
Just that there are this many. Lots and lots of cards. And I color coded them for people who are interested in the gene keys according to Richard Rudd's codon system, 21 rings. And that will be, you can learn more about that in the gene keys. And I put a little list of it in the little mini book. It comes, this box, you open it up, and it comes with a book. And it's like this. So you can, so each wisdom keeper has a story and a gift to you and questions to contemplate and, suggestions for ways that you can embody or work with the themes or the archetypes. Each one has a programming partner. That's a Richard Rudd term. So they all have like a soul friend, which is kind of fun to explore. And then, like I said before, I actually created a larger version of this. I don't have a copy of it yet, but that will be coming out as well, which I'm really excited about because the words will be really easy to read and the cards, the full card images will be in there, and it's much more beautifully edited thanks to Ann Cameron. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Wonderful. Well, I think that people are going to be learning about the gene keys through osmosis. At least I hope I will. This is so exciting. I wanted to ask you, in light of all the recent tragedies in Northern California, the wildfires, people, losing long-term jobs, loved ones, pets, and now this recent attack in Paris. I mean, there's a lot of grieving and wounding going on, one on top of the other, on top of the next, on top of the next. How do you feel is the best way to deal with people who are grieving? Like, what advice do you give to interact with people who are experiencing loss and grief and shock? And also, what advice would you give those who are in grieving?
Wait, what was the difference between the two? People
the two is comforting and showing empathy for someone, knowing people who are grieving or in shock or in trauma right now. So one is interacting with them, and the other is, experiencing these losses yourself.
Oh, okay.
So, one after the other.
There is no simple formulaic answer to that question. And I don't think humanity has ever been exposed to this much suffering. We have access to so much more suffering now. It's kind of just because of the internet and social media, so many horrible things have been happening on the planet always, but now we can see all of it. And so on the one hand, it can, we can be overwhelmed with grief, and on another hand, we can become completely desensitized and not actually be feeling what we need to be feeling. And part of that is because of the sheer amount of access we have to the suffering on the planet. And so there's also personal grief, and then there's collective grief. And I think a lot of us sensitives are experiencing both of those simultaneously, and it's like we can go on circuit overload, really. And so for me, for myself, again, it's not like I have some like template or something to offer you about it. It's like I just let myself grieve. I just cry when I need to cry. And then sometimes I do things like make an oracle deck, because it helped me. Like when I was thinking about something, I think at the time that I was working on this, there was a lot of violence going on. I mean, there's still going on in Israel with the Palestinians and the Israelis. And I just felt like I needed to see faces, a Palestinian face and an Israeli face, expressing the love and the interconnectedness that we all have the potential to I had to just, that was a way that I could work through my own grief, like to do something. Sometimes it's just like just loving the people in your life, just like looking at the person who's right next to you and loving them and caring about them and being empathic. And sometimes it's about going out and really being an activist, say, okay, what can I do? Okay, so there was this horrible tsunami. How am I going to participate in mobilizing food and shelter and help for these people who just went through that? Or now, I know people in Paris, so I'm reaching out and I'm connecting with them and asking if there's anything I can do. Sometimes there are concrete things that we can do. Sometimes when it's something far away and we're just feeling the tsunami of grief around it, we gotta feel and then make a difference wherever we possibly can and create whatever we can that makes a little tiny difference in this world, because we all make a difference, even in the smallest ways. Sometimes I'll go to the store and just be particularly nice to the cash register person when they're in a horrible mood. Like it's the one thing I can do today. I can just spread a little joy, be a little more, easygoing if someone's, a little bit nasty, or, I can do that. That's something I can do.
Yeah.
There was something else I was going to say. Something about, just because there's a lot of suffering in the world doesn't mean that we don't get to experience our joy either. It's kind of like there's something about, it's all happening all of the time, and how can we be true to what's actually relevant and happening to us now? I think sometimes I can get so burdened by the sadness in the world that I forget to be grateful for the many blessings of my life. And when I'm grateful for the blessings and I'm letting my cup get filled up, I have more to give. I have more to offer people who are suffering, people who are grieving. And so something about not holding back just because they're suffering outside. If there's a joy to be felt, have it, have it. We need people also to be feeling surplus, because it's out of that place that we can give more when people don't have, does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think you pointed out some beautiful, beautiful points, especially about processing your own feelings through just creating and using that as a medium to process and feel and not have to figure things out, but just dive into something new. So in closing, I'd like to hear, what does salt of the earth mean to you?
Salt of the earth. I loved when I heard that was the name of your show. I don't know. I think of salt of the earth, other than the obvious thing, it feels like the extraordinary and the ordinary. It feels like bringing spirit into matter, just down to earth, the grit, the grime, finding spirit in that, I feel like for me, it's the guest house, it's Rumi's The Guest House. It's like embracing the whole of our lives right here, not getting lost in the ascension process, like remembering that heaven is right here, right now, in the salt of the earth. That's kind of what comes to me. It feels very indigenous. It feels very rooted.
I'm going to write this down. I love it. You captured it just beautifully. I'm so moved and touched by our conversation, and so grateful to know you. And how can we find the Wisdom Keepers?
Okay. So you can find the Wisdom Keeper Oracle deck at wisdomkeepers.net. And there are some special offers right now that are going to last through December 15th. So if anybody is interested, check that out. You go to wisdomkeepers.net, and then at the top there's a link, and you can click on that to the special offers page. If you want to learn about the 64 Faces of Awakening, which are the faces out of which this deck kind of was born from, then go to 64faces.com. Because I'm selling art prints. I would love to make installations in yoga centers. I'd love these faces to be in airports, just uplifting people's spirits, I'm open, but that's where you'll see the faces. You can blow them up a little bit so you can see the details that you can't see in the cards.
Mm-hmm.
I sell them on a larger scale as well for people who are interested in that, and I'm looking for all kinds of ideas.
I was just going to ask you what's next for you. What's your big vision right now? And there you have it. Having them in airports. Wow, that would be amazing. I love it. This can have a really beautiful life of its own.
Yeah. I hope so. Well, the Wisdom Keepers, they've got their own ideas for what they want. So I'm just trying to be a humble servant and and keep up with it. Keep up with it. But yeah, wouldn't that be awesome? Like people going through the airport feeling really stressed out and then being surrounded by this international family of loving people.
that are really seeing you and with
Yes,
such warmth. Yeah.
yeah, that would be
I
so.
think those, I mean, that is what heals the world, being seen like that. I love it. I'm going to hold that vision with you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for chatting and joining me today. And I recommend everyone who is in a self-inquiry process to check out Rosy's Design to Blossom program. It's really wonderful.
Thank
So
you.
thank you so much. Aloha.
Aloha.